When did Hinduism begin? Was there a founder? A revelation? A single moment in history? The answer may surprise you. Hinduism did not begin with a date. It did not begin with a prophet. And it did not begin with one book. Hinduism did not begin. It became. The birth of Hinduism is not the story of an event. It is the story of a civilization slowly discovering meaning. Through rituals, through philosophy, through nature, and through lived experience. Hinduism did not appear suddenly in India. It took shape over thousands of years, shaped by changing societies, evolving ideas, and continuous questioning about life, duty, and the universe. To ask about the birth of Hinduism is not to search for an origin point in time. It is to trace a long process of transformation, from early ritual practices of ancient settlements to the philosophical depth of the Vedas and the Upanishads, and later to devotional traditions, temples, and everyday worship. Hinduism emerged gradually, absorbing, adapting, and redefining itself across generations. In this video, we look beyond myths and assumptions. We explore how Hinduism came into effect in India, not as a fixed system imposed all at once, but as a living tradition, shaped by history, culture, and human thought. This is not a debate. This is not a belief test. This is a journey through time. Chapter 1. Birth of Hinduism, a question that has no single date. When did Hinduism begin? At first, the question sounds simple, but the answer is not. Most major religions can be traced to a specific moment in history. The life of a founder, a divine revelation, the writing of sacred text. Hinduism does not fit into this framework. There is no single individual who can be identified as its originator. No fixed year that marks its beginning. No singular event that announces its arrival. The birth of Hinduism is therefore not an event in history. It is a process in civilization. Why Hinduism has no founding moment? Hinduism developed in a region that supported continuity, not rupture. The Indian subcontinent, with its rivers, fertile plains, dense forests, and seasonal rhythms, allowed cultural practices to persist, adapt, and layer upon one another. New ideas did not erase older ones. They were absorbed, reinterpreted, preserved alongside them. Because of this, Hinduism did not grow from a single source. It grew from many streams. It grew through inherited rituals, passed orally across generations, through evolving social structures and occupations, through philosophical inquiry into life, death, and consciousness, and through everyday practices shaped by geography and community. Rather than being defined by a single doctrine, Hinduism became a network of traditions, unified not by uniform belief, but by shared cultural memory. Religion as lived experience, not sudden revelation. In its earliest phases, what we now call Hinduism was not recognized as a religion at all. There were no temples, no standardized prayers, no organized priesthood. Spiritual life was expressed through seasonal rituals, respect for natural forces, and symbolic acts tied to survival and social order. Religion was not something separate from daily life. It was woven into it. Over time, these practices gained structure. Rituals became formalized. Philosophies emerged to question their meaning. Stories were told to explain the relationship between humans, nature, and the cosmos. Each phase added depth, but none replaced the previous one entirely. This continuity is why Hinduism appears layered rather than linear. Stepping away from modern labels. The word Hinduism itself is a modern construction. Applying it retrospectively to ancient practices can create the illusion of a unified system that did not exist in the same way thousands of years ago. Early communities did not identify themselves as Hindus. They did not conceive their practices as belonging to a single religious identity. Understanding how Hinduism came into effect in India requires stepping away from present-day definitions. It requires viewing history, not through fixed categories, but through gradual cultural evolution, where belief systems emerge from daily life, respond to social needs, and mature through reflection and reinterpretation. A civilization in motion. Hinduism did not begin because it did not need to. It grew as Indian society grew. It changed as people questioned ritual, explored philosophy, and sought meaning beyond survival. What we see today as Hinduism is the result of centuries of accumulation, not invention. The birth of Hinduism, then, is not a moment to be dated. It is a continuum to be understood. Chapter 2. Before Hinduism, Spiritual Life in Ancient India. Long before the word Hindu existed, and long before religious identity became formalized, the Indian subcontinent already displayed signs of complex spiritual life. These early expressions were not shaped by doctrine, not by scripture, and not by theology. They were shaped by environment, by survival, and by symbolic meaning. Spirituality was not a separate system. It was part of everyday life. The Indus Valley Civilization, the earliest clear archaeological window into this world, comes from the Indus Valley Civilization, dating back to roughly 2600 to 1900 BCE. It stands among the world's oldest urban cultures. Cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro reveal a society that was highly organized, technologically advanced, and symbolically expressive. Yet, no religious texts survive from this civilization. Still, material evidence tells a powerful story. Ritual without religion. Archaeological findings suggest structured ritual behavior, most notably ritual bathing. The Great Bath of Mohenjo-daro points to purification practices that likely held symbolic or communal significance. We also find seals and iconography depicting animals, trees, and human-like figures in seated or meditative postures. There is also evidence of reverence for fertility and nature, recurring motifs linked to animals, plants, and possibly mother goddess symbolism appear across artifacts. Together, these elements suggest that spiritual meaning was embedded in daily life, not separated into a religious institution. What is absent matters just as much. Equally important is what the Indus Valley does not show. There are no temples or monumental religious structures, no evidence of a priestly class or centralized religious authority, no known scriptures, hymns, or theological systems. This absence is significant. It tells us that while ritual and symbolism existed, organized religion had not yet taken form. There was no codified belief system, no hierarchy controlling spiritual life, no formal separation between the sacred and the social. Ritualistic spirituality, not organized religion. The spiritual life of the Indus Valley appears to have been ritualistic, not doctrinal. Practices were likely tied to seasonal cycles, fertility, water, and protection, concerns rooted in survival and community cohesion. Rather than worshiping defined gods with fixed identities, people likely engaged with symbols and forces they believed influenced nature and human life. Meaning was expressed through action and through symbol, not through belief statements or theology. Before religion took shape, this stage of Indian spiritual history represents a world before religion crystallized into structured systems. There was spirituality, but not religion as we recognize it today. No clear boundaries existed between ritual, culture, and daily existence. These early practices did not disappear. Instead, they formed a cultural substratum, quietly influencing later developments. When rituals became formalized, philosophies emerged, and belief systems took shape. Understanding this phase helps explain why Hinduism would later emerge, not as a sudden invention, but as a continuation and transformation of older ways of understanding the world. Chapter 3. The Vedic Phase, the Structural Foundation, circa 1500 to 1000 BC. The next major transformation in India's spiritual history came with the Vedic period. This phase did not mark the birth of Hinduism, but it laid the structural and conceptual foundation upon which Hinduism would later develop. For the first time, spiritual practices began to take a more defined and transmissible form, not through institutions, not through temples, but through ritual, language, and memory. Composition of the Vedas, the earliest identifiable layer of Hindu thought, appears in the Vedas, a collection of hymns and ritual texts, composed and preserved orally over many centuries. Among them, the Rig Veda stands as the oldest surviving record of early Indian religious thought. These texts were not philosophical treatises. They were not moral codes. They were practical, ritual-oriented compositions, meant to be recited, not read. Knowledge was preserved through precise oral transmission. Sound mattered. Rhythm mattered. Memorization itself was considered sacred. The spoken word was the carrier of truth. Core features of Vedic religion. The Vedic worldview revolved around maintaining harmony between humans and the cosmos. This relationship was managed through ritual action, not personal belief. Key characteristics included hymns addressed to natural forces, Agni the fire, Indra the storm and strength, Varuna the guardian of cosmic order. Knowledge passed orally with no reliance on written doctrine or scripture, and yajnas, sacrificial rituals performed by trained priests to sustain cosmic balance. These rituals were not symbolic alone. They were believed to actively maintain the order of the universe, cosmic order over personal faith. At this stage, belief centered on the concept of Ta, the cosmic order that governed nature, seasons, and moral balance. Human responsibility lay in supporting this order through correct ritual performance. Importantly, the gods were impersonal forces, not personal saviors. Devotion was secondary to precision. Ritual correctness mattered more than inner faith. There was little concern for salvation, for liberation, or for personal spirituality. The focus was external, communal, and cosmic, a religion of action, not identity. Vedic religion was not about religious identity. In the modern sense, there was no concept of conversion, no exclusive belief system, no singular path to truth. Participation was defined by role and ritual, not personal conviction. This makes it fundamentally different from Hinduism, as practiced today, not yet Hinduism, while later Hindu traditions would inherit many ideas from the Vedic world: sacred sound, ritual discipline, and philosophical inquiry. The Vedic system itself was not Hinduism. It lacked temples. It lacked devotional worship. It lacked personal gods. It lacked philosophical liberation doctrines. Instead, it represents an early religious framework, one concerned with sustaining the universe rather than transforming the self. A foundation, not a destination. This Vedic phase provided structure, language, and ritual logic, elements that would later be questioned, reinterpreted, and expanded as Indian spirituality gradually moved from ritual toward philosophy and eventually toward devotion. Chapter 4. The Upanishadic Shift from Ritual to Philosophy, c. 800 to 500 BCE. Over time, the ritual-heavy Vedic system began to face quiet but profound questioning as sacrifices grew, increasingly elaborate and increasingly priest-centered. Some thinkers began to ask a different kind of question: can ritual alone explain existence? Can it explain suffering? Can it explain human consciousness? This questioning marked a decisive shift from external action to internal inquiry. The emergence of the Upanishads. This new way of thinking found expression in the Upanishads. They were composed as reflections, as dialogues, as teachings, passed quietly from teacher to student. Unlike the Vedas, the Upanishads were not concerned with maintaining cosmic order through sacrifice. They were concerned with understanding reality itself. They did not reject the Vedas outright. They reinterpreted them Ritual was no longer dismissed, but it was no longer sufficient. Radical questions that changed Indian thought. The Upanishadic thinkers asked questions that had never been central before. What is the self? Is the Atman the body, the mind, or something beyond both? What is ultimate reality? Is Brahman a god, or a single underlying principle behind the diversity of a world? And finally, is ritual enough, or is knowledge superior? Can liberation be achieved through action alone, or does it require insight? These were not abstract, philosophical exercises. They were existential questions, rooted in birth, suffering, death, and the human search for meaning. A shift away from sacrifice. During this phase, a subtle but powerful transformation occurred. Dependence on large scale. Sacrificial rituals declined. Authority shifted from priests to teachers and sages. Forests and hermitages became centers of learning, not altars. Spiritual progress was no longer measured by ritual precision. It was measured by understanding, by realization. The birth of core concepts, some of the most enduring ideas of Hindu philosophy, emerged during this period. Karma, the principle that actions have consequences beyond a single lifetime. Rebirth, or sasra, the cycle of birth, death, and return. And moksha, liberation from this cycle through knowledge. Crucially, liberation was no longer something granted by gods through ritual. It was something realized through insight. Spirituality turns inward. With the Upanishads, Indian spirituality underwent an inward turn. Truth was no longer sought only in fire altars and sacred hymns. It was sought within consciousness itself. The ultimate discovery was not a distant god, but the realization that Atman and Brahman are one. This single idea transformed the spiritual landscape permanently, laying the philosophical backbone of Hinduism. The Upanishadic shift did not create Hinduism overnight, but it provided Hinduism with metaphysical depth, philosophical flexibility, and room for multiple paths to truth. Later devotional movements, ethical systems, and theological schools would all build upon this foundation. If the Vedic period gave Indian religion its structure, the Upanishads gave its soul and intellect. Chapter 5. The Epic and Puranic Synthesis, c. 300 BCE, 500 CE. By the early centuries of the Common Era, Indian spirituality entered a new phase, a phase of integration and accessibility. Ideas that were once confined to sages and students now began to reach ordinary people. Philosophy was no longer only discussed in forests and hermitages. It was translated into stories, symbols, and devotional practices that people could live with and relate to. This period marks a crucial synthesis, a moment when ritual, philosophy, mythology, and ethics came together. It is during this time that recognizable Hinduism begins to take shape, a shift toward personal deities. One of the most significant changes of this era was the rise of personal forms of the divine, the abstract cosmic forces of the Vedic age, and the philosophical absolutes of the Upanishads were now expressed through relatable divine personalities. Major devotional traditions emerged around deities such as Vishnu, associated with preservation and moral order, Shiva, representing transformation, ascetic insight, and inner discipline, and Devi, embodying power, protection, and compassion. These gods were no longer distant cosmic forces. They could be loved, feared, prayed to. They could be personally connected with. The power of epic storytelling. Philosophical ideas now found a powerful new medium. Stories, most notably the great epics, the Ramayana and Mahabharata. Through these narratives, people encountered philosophy, not as abstraction, but as lived experience. The epics presented moral dilemmas through human characters. They explored duty, dharma, loyalty, sacrifice, justice, They blended divine intervention with human struggle rather than debating ideas. People felt them. Ethics and philosophy became emotionally resonant and socially relevant. The role of the Puranas. Alongside the epics, the Puranas played a crucial role in shaping popular Hinduism. The Puranas organized complex ideas into rich, layered narratives. They connected gods and their genealogies, cosmic creation and destruction, and the moral consequences of human actions. Through these stories, philosophy was woven into mythology. Belief became inseparable from culture. Religion was no longer only something practiced. It was remembered, retold, and lived. Religion becomes accessible and emotional. During this phase, religion underwent a fundamental transformation. It became accessible, no longer limited to priests or philosophers. It became emotional, centered on devotion, love, fear, and surrender. And it became narrative-driven, taught through stories, rather than rituals alone. Spiritual practice was no longer confined to sacrifice or meditation. It entered homes, festivals, songs, and everyday life, temples, pilgrimages, and devotion. This period also saw visible changes in how religion appeared in society. Permanent temples emerged as centers of worship. Pilgrimages connected geography with sacred memory and devotional practices. Bhakti focused on personal connection with the divine. Religion became visible in architecture, art, and community life. It embedded itself deeply into society. The formation of recognizable Hinduism. By the end of this period, most of the elements associated with Hinduism today were firmly in place. Multiple paths to the divine, personal gods, alongside philosophical depth, ritual, devotion, and storytelling, coexisting. Hinduism was no longer only a system of ritual or philosophy. It had become a living, shared tradition, practiced across regions and generations. This synthesis did not erase earlier traditions. It absorbed them, and in doing so, it gave Hinduism its enduring, pluralistic character. Chapter 6. So, when did Hinduism begin? When did Hinduism begin? The honest answer is both simple and profound. Hinduism did not begin. It became, unlike religions that trace their origins to a founding figure or defining moment, Hinduism emerged through a long and continuous process of cultural and spiritual evolution. It was shaped not by revelation at a single point in time, but by centuries of human experience, by questioning, by adaptation, and by synthesis. A tradition formed over millennia. Hinduism took form gradually across multiple phases. Prehistoric ritual practices rooted in nature, survival, and symbolism. Vedic sacrificial systems introducing structure, sacred language, and cosmic order. Philosophical inquiry, where thinkers questioned ritual and turned inward in search of truth. Devotional movements, making spirituality personal, emotional, and accessible. And social and cultural synthesis, where stories, temples, ethics, and daily practices merged into lived tradition. Each phase added depth. None erased what came before. Instead of replacement, there was accumulation, not founded but formed. To search for a founding date of Hinduism is to apply a modern framework to an ancient reality. Hinduism did not arise as a system to be adopted or imposed. It emerged as a way of understanding life, shaped by geography, by society, and by sustained reflection. It absorbed contradictions. It allowed multiple paths, and it survived because it adapted. A living, evolving tradition. Hinduism is best understood not as a religion founded in time, but as a living tradition shaped by history. Its continuity lies not in uniform belief, but in its capacity to evolve while retaining memory. This is why Hinduism contains ritual and philosophy devotion and skepticism, discipline and spontaneity. It is not frozen. In its origins, it moves with time, the meaning of becoming. To say Hinduism became is not to deny its depth. It is to recognize its resilience. What emerged over millennia was not a single doctrine, but a civilizational response to existence itself. And that is why Hinduism has endured, not because it began once, but because it continues to become. Why this understanding matters today. Understanding the birth of Hinduism is not merely an academic exercise. It shapes how religion is perceived, how it is practiced, and how it is discussed in the modern world. When Hinduism is viewed through its historical evolution rather than as a fixed system, several important insights emerge. Religion is not static. Hinduism reminds us that religious traditions are not frozen at the moment of their earliest expression. They grow, they absorb influences, they reinterpret ideas, and they respond to changing realities. What existed as ritual in one era transformed into philosophy in another, and later into devotion and social practice. Change in this context is not corruption, it is continuity. Belief systems respond to society. As societies evolve, so do their spiritual needs. The questions asked by people living in forests, cities, kingdoms, or modern nation-states are not the same. Hinduism's ability to adapt, from sacrificial rituals to introspective philosophy, from abstract metaphysics to personal devotion, reflects this responsiveness. This adaptability is not accidental. It is one of the reasons Hinduism has remained relevant across centuries of social, political, and cultural change. Diversity is natural, not contradictory. One of the most misunderstood aspects of Hinduism is its internal diversity. Multiple philosophies, rituals, and devotional paths often coexist, sometimes appearing contradictory. From the outside, history shows us that this diversity is not a flaw. It is the outcome of layered development. Different paths emerged to meet different human needs. All were allowed to exist. Unity in Hinduism does not come from uniform belief, but from a shared cultural and philosophical space. Faith and history are not opposites. A historical understanding of Hinduism does not weaken faith. It deepens it. Knowing how traditions formed, adapted, and survived adds context, humility, and respect. Faith becomes informed rather than fragile. And when belief is grounded in understanding, it becomes more resilient, not less. A tradition that endures by evolving. Hinduism has endured, not because it resisted change, but because it accommodated it. Its strength lies in its capacity to evolve, while retaining memory, meaning, and continuity. Understanding this evolution allows us to engage with Hinduism, not as a rigid inheritance, but as a living tradition, one that invites reflection, adaptation, and respect. Closing reflection. Hinduism is not a monument built once. It is a river shaped by countless streams, seasons, and terrains, flowing steadily through time. Its source is not a single spring, but many beginnings. Ritual, philosophy, devotion, and lived experience all merge into its current. And like all rivers, its strength does not lie in where it began, but in its ability to move, to adapt, and to carry meaning forward. That continuous movement, patient, resilient, and inclusive, is what has allowed Hinduism to endure as a living tradition rather than a frozen past. Hinduism did not begin at a single moment in history. It evolved, shaped by ritual, philosophy, and devotion, flowing through time as a living tradition. Thank you for watching. If this exploration helped you see Hinduism differently, feel free to reflect and continue the journey.